The charity dinner glowed with wealth and privilege. String lights casting shadows over tables where million-dollar conversations happened between champagne toasts. Isaiah Cole stood at the edge barefoot and invisible, watching the wheelchair-bound billionaire crack jokes about his broken body while boasting about the millions he'd spent chasing a cure. When Richard Halvorson spotted the poor black boy in the shadows and offered him $1 million as a joke. "Fix me if you can, kid," he had no idea he'd just challenged someone who carried 3 generations of forgotten healing knowledge in his hands. Isaiah knew what would happen after he succeeded, the mockery and backlash that would follow. But some truths are worth the cost of speaking them even when the world isn't ready to listen. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The charity dinner glowed like a different world. String lights crisscrossed the outdoor courtyard of the Riverside Hotel, casting warm light over polished tables draped in white linen. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved between clusters of wealthy donors, carrying trays of champagne and appetizers that cost more than most people's grocery bills. Laughter floated through the evening air, punctuated by the clink of crystal glasses and the soft hum of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. Isaiah Cole stood at the edge of it all, barefoot on the cool pavement, watching. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. The charity event was for people who wrote checks with multiple zeros, people who arrived in cars that purred instead of rattled. Isaiah had wandered over from the bus stop 3 blocks away, drawn by the smell of food and the possibility of leftovers. Now he stood near the service entrance, holding a few pieces of bread wrapped carefully in paper napkins a kind waiter had slipped him. At 13, Isaiah had learned to make himself small. He wore jeans 2 sizes too big, held up by a fraying belt, and a gray hoodie that had seen better years. His hair was cut short, practical, and his dark eyes tracked everything with a sharpness that made adults uncomfortable when they bothered to notice him at all. Most people looked right past him. That was usually fine with Isaiah. He watched the guests move and laugh, but his attention kept returning to their bodies. The way that woman in the blue dress favored her left hip. The man near the bar whose shoulder rolled forward, probably from years hunched over a desk. The teenage girl who walked on the balls of her feet, knees locked, heading toward knee problems before she turned 25. Isaiah saw these things the way other people notice someone's hairstyle or the color of their shirt. It was automatic, unavoidable. His grandmother had taught him to see this way, back when he was small enough to fit in her lap. She'd press his tiny fingers to her own wrist, teaching him to feel the pulse, to understand the maps beneath the skin. Muscles, tendons, nerves, the architecture that held bodies together. Her mother had taught her, and her mother before that, a chain of knowledge stretching back through generations of people who'd never had the luxury of doctors or hospitals. They'd learned by necessity, in plantation fields and boxing rings, in wars where black medics patched together soldiers who'd never acknowledged their skill, in neighborhoods where a broken bone meant choosing between rent and healing. Isaiah's father had known even more. He'd been able to look at an athlete and spot the injury before it happened, adjust a fighter's stance, and add years to their career, ease chronic pain with his hands in ways that seemed impossible until you watch him do it. But his father was gone now, and his grandmother too, and Isaiah was alone with knowledge that nobody wanted to believe a poor black kid could possess. He took a small bite of bread, chewing slowly to make it last, when the crowd's energy shifted. Heads turned, voices dropped, and then rose again. Someone important had arrived. The wheelchair came through the main entrance, pushed by a young attendant in a black suit. But the man in the chair wasn't being quiet about his condition. He rolled himself forward with strong arms, dismissing the attendant with a wave, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Don't worry, I won't run anyone over," Richard Halvorson called out, and the crowd laughed. Though at this point, that might be the most exercise I get. More laughter, though this time it sounded uncomfortable, unsure if the joke was permission to find the situation funny. Richard didn't seem to care. He was a big man, probably athletic before his injury, with silver hair swept back from a face that looked used to getting its way. His suit probably cost more than 3 months' rent. A woman walked beside him, elegant and tense, touching his shoulder in a way that looked more like duty than affection. Isaiah recognized her from a magazine cover he'd seen at a corner store. Evelyn Halvorson, Richard's wife. She smiled at the guests, but her eyes kept darting to her husband, tracking his mood. "Richard, so glad you could make it," a man in a burgundy blazer said, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Wouldn't miss it, Tom." Richard shook his hand firmly. "Besides, sitting at home, feeling sorry for myself, gets boring. Figured I'd come out and show everyone what all those donations are supposedly fixing." He gestured at his legs with a theatrical flourish. Spoiler alert, still not walking. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or look away. Isaiah watched Richard's face, the practiced smile that didn't quite hide something bitter underneath. Anger, maybe, or fear dressed up as confidence. "You're looking well, though," a woman in pearls offered carefully. "I'm rich, Margaret. Rich people always look well." Richard accepted a glass of whiskey from a passing waiter. "We just pay better for our misery." That got genuine laughs. Richard seemed to expand with the attention, rolling himself toward the center of the courtyard where the main table waited. As he moved, Isaiah's eyes caught on something. The way Richard's left foot turned slightly inward, locked in an unnatural position. The way his right shoulder sat higher than his left, compensating for years of imbalance. The subtle tremor in his left hand when it wasn't gripping the wheelchair. Isaiah had seen injuries like this before, mostly in the homeless camps where he spent his nights. Spinal damage, probably mid to lower back, with nerve compression that doctors had treated without understanding the full picture. They'd focused on the obvious trauma and missed the cascade of compensation patterns that made everything worse. 3 years ago, Richard was saying, holding court at the main table now, "I fell off a ladder at one of my construction sites." Stupid, right? Millionaire climbs a ladder because he doesn't trust his contractor's measurements. Landed wrong, crushed 2 vertebrae, and now I'm the poster child for spinal injury recovery. He said it like a punchline, but Isaiah heard the edge underneath. "You've been working with Dr. Mercer, though," someone said. "He's supposed to be the best." "Dr. Alan Mercer is a genius," Richard agreed, his tone making it unclear if he meant it as a compliment. "Top neurologist in the state. Has published papers, won awards, charges enough to buy a small island per consultation. And you know what he tells me every month? We're seeing progress, Mr. Halvorson. Stay patient. 3 years of patience, ladies and gentlemen, and I still can't walk to my own bathroom." Evelyn put a hand on his arm. "Richard, you don't need to." "Don't need to what?" "Tell the truth." He took a long drink. "I've spent millions on the best medical care money can buy. State-of-the-art treatments, experimental procedures, physical therapy that costs more per hour than most people make in a day. And here I sit, exactly where I was 3 years ago." He raised his glass. "So please, donate generously. Maybe your money will work better than mine." The table went quiet. Uncomfortable glances passed between guests. Isaiah shifted his weight, thinking about slipping away before the evening got more awkward, when Richard's gaze swept across the courtyard and landed on him. "And who's this?" Richard called out, his voice cutting through the silence. "We get new waiter? Little young. Aren't you, kid?" Everyone turned to look. Isaiah froze, suddenly visible in a way he hadn't intended. "He's not staff," someone murmured. "I think he's just what?" Richard's eyebrows rose. "Just hanging around a $500 a plate charity dinner? That's entrepreneurial. I respect that." A few people chuckled. Isaiah felt his face grow hot, but kept his expression neutral. He learned not to show emotion when adults decided to notice him. It usually went better that way. "You hungry, kid?" Richard asked. "We got plenty of food. Come here, grab a plate." It was phrased as generosity, but Isaiah heard the performance in it. Richard was showing the crowd his charitable side, or maybe just distracting them from his earlier bitterness. Either way, Isaiah knew better than to refuse. He walked forward slowly, aware of every eye tracking him. "What's your name?" Richard asked as Isaiah approached. "Isaiah, sir." "Isaiah. Biblical name. Good choice." Richard looked him over, taking in the oversized clothes, the bare feet, the careful way Isaiah held himself. "You from around here?" "Yes, sir." "Where do you live?" Isaiah hesitated. Different places. Different places, Richard repeated, and something knowing entered his expression. So nowhere. You're homeless. It wasn't a question. Isaiah didn't answer. Tough break, kid. Richard leaned back in his wheelchair. How old are you? 13. 13 and on the streets. Where are your parents? Gone. The word hung in the air. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. A few guests suddenly found their drinks very interesting. Richard studied Isaiah for a long moment, and Isaiah met his gaze steadily. That's when Isaiah saw it clearly, the full picture of Richard's injury. The way his spine curved slightly to the right to protect the damaged area. The way his breathing was shallow, compensating for restricted diaphragm movement. The way his left hip was rotated forward, creating a chain of tension that probably caused him daily pain his doctors dismissed as unrelated. Can I look at your leg, sir? The words came out before Isaiah could stop them. The table went silent. Excuse me, Richard said. Isaiah realized his mistake, but pushed forward anyway. Your leg. I think I see what's wrong. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. It spread through the crowd like a spark catching dry grass. You think you see what's wrong? Richard's smile was dangerous now. Kid, I've had a dozen specialists look at my legs. Neurologists, orthopedic surgeons, physical therapists with degrees longer than you've been alive. But sure, you spotted something they all missed. I know how it sounds, Isaiah said quietly. Do you? Richard's voice rose. Do you know how it sounds when a homeless kid with no education claims he can diagnose a spinal injury just by looking? That's not confidence, son. That's delusion. The crowd murmured agreement. Someone pulled out their phone, starting to record. Isaiah felt the situation slipping away from him, but couldn't seem to stop talking. Your left foot turns in because your hip is rotated. Your hip is rotated because your spine is protecting the injury site. Your doctors treated the spine, but never reset the compensations. That's why you're not getting better. The murmurs stopped. People stared at Isaiah with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Even Richard looked taken aback for a moment before his expression hardened into something cruel. Well. Richard spread his arms wide, playing to the crowd. We've got a miracle worker here, folks. 13 years old, and he solved what the best medical minds in the state couldn't figure out. He leaned forward. Tell you what, Isaiah, since you're so confident, let's make it interesting. Isaiah felt his stomach tighten. Fix me, Richard said, his voice dripping with mockery. Right here, right now. If you could get me out of this chair, I'll give you $1 million. $1 million. That's enough to get you off the streets, buy a house, set yourself up for life. All you have to do is perform your little miracle. The crowd erupted. People laughed, gasped, started talking over each other. Phones rose, capturing the moment. Someone shouted, "Do it, kid." Another voice called, "This I gotta see." Richard, this isn't appropriate, Evelyn said, her voice tight. Why not? The boy's making medical claims. Let him back them up. Richard gestured grandly at Isaiah. Or was it all talk? Just trying to get attention from the rich folks. From somewhere in the growing crowd, Isaiah heard a familiar voice, rough and urgent. Don't. He turned and saw Coach Leonard Brooks standing at the back, an old black man in a worn jacket, his face creased with worry. Brooks used to coach at the high school before budget cuts took his job. Now he lived in the same abandoned buildings where Isaiah sometimes slept. He was one of the few people who knew about Isaiah's family, about what his father could do. Brooks shook his head slowly, a clear warning. But everyone was watching now, waiting. The moment had grown too big to back away from. Isaiah looked at Richard Halvorson in his wheelchair, at Evelyn's worried face, at the crowd of wealthy strangers holding their phones up like they were at a circus, and felt something settle in his chest. You won't like what happens after, Isaiah said quietly. Richard threw his head back and laughed, a genuine belly laugh that got the whole crowd going. Kid, I already don't like what's happening now. I can't walk. What could possibly be worse? He slapped the arm of his wheelchair. Come on, Dr. Barefoot. Show us what you've got. The nickname rippled through the crowd, people repeating it with laughter. Dr. Barefoot. Isaiah felt the weight of their amusement, their certainty that he was about to fail and entertain them in the process. He looked at Coach Brooks one more time. Brooks had closed his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Isaiah stepped forward. "Wait, are we really doing this?" someone asked. "Let him try," Richard said, waving away his wife's protest. "What's he going to do, make it worse?" The kids had no training, no education. "He's going to touch my leg, feel stupid, and we'll all go back to our dinners with a funny story." He looked at his security guard, a large man in a dark suit. "Keep an eye on him, Marcus. Make sure he doesn't try anything crazy." Marcus nodded, moving closer. Isaiah ignored him, his attention fully on Richard now. The crowd pressed in, forming a loose circle around the wheelchair. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. The entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Isaiah knelt beside the wheelchair, his bare knees on the cold pavement. Up close, he could see more details. The expensive brace on Richard's left ankle. The custom cushion on the wheelchair seat, designed to prevent pressure sores. The slight atrophy in his calf muscles from 3 years of limited use. "This is insane," Evelyn muttered, but she didn't stop it. "Your left foot first," Isaiah said, his voice steady. "I need to see something." He reached out slowly, giving Richard time to object, and placed his hands on Richard's left shoe. He could feel the foot's position through the leather, the unnatural angle that had become locked over years of compensating movement. "Kid's got soft hands," Richard joked to the crowd. "Maybe he's a pickpocket. Everyone check your wallets." Laughter scattered through the audience, but it was thinner now. People were actually watching, curious despite themselves. Isaiah closed his eyes briefly, feeling the structure beneath his palms. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The body remembers what it's supposed to be. Sometimes it just needs permission to go back. He moved his hands higher, to Richard's ankle, then his calf. His fingers found points of tension, places where muscles had been holding patterns for so long they'd forgotten how to release. He pressed gently on the outside of Richard's knee, feeling for the rotation in the hip socket. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, and for the first time, his mocking tone had faded. He sounded genuinely curious. "Your fibularis longus is locked short," Isaiah said, the medical terms coming easily. "It's pulling your foot into inversion. But that's not the cause, it's a compensation. The real issue is your left iliacus and psoas. They've been in protective spasm since your injury, and they've rotated your entire pelvis forward on the left side. That's created a functional leg length discrepancy of about 3/4 of an inch." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even Richard stared at Isaiah with an expression that wasn't quite mockery anymore. "How do you know those words?" someone whispered. Isaiah didn't answer. He was feeling for the primary point now, the place where everything had locked up. His fingers found it at the junction of Richard's hip and lower abdomen, a spot where the psoas muscle attached to the spine. He could feel the tension there, years of it, wound tight as a spring. "I need you to breathe," Isaiah said. "Deep breath in. Kid, I don't think. Just breathe." Richard took a breath, still watching Isaiah with that strange new attention. On the exhale, Isaiah pressed firmly into the psoas attachment point, his other hand stabilizing Richard's hip. He felt the muscle resist, then resist harder, then suddenly. He twisted, sharp and fast, using the release he'd felt to guide Richard's pelvis back toward neutral. Richard screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain exactly, more shock and surprise. His whole body jerked in the wheelchair. His left foot, which had been turned inward for 3 years, suddenly straightened. His toes, which hadn't moved independently in all that time, curled and then spread. "Jesus Christ," someone shouted. Evelyn grabbed Richard's shoulder. Marcus, the security guard, stepped forward but stopped, unsure what he was seeing. The crowd surged closer, phones capturing everything, voices rising in a chaos of disbelief. Richard looked down at his own foot like it belonged to someone else. His toes curled again. His ankle flexed. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Did you see that?" a woman gasped. His foot moved. "It's a trick," someone else said. "It has to be." But Richard wasn't laughing anymore. He was breathing hard, staring at Isaiah with something that looked like fear. "What did you do?" What the hell did you do to me? I didn't do anything, Isaiah said quietly. I just reminded your body how it's supposed to work. This isn't possible. Richard gripped the arms of his wheelchair. My foot hasn't moved like that in 3 years. Dr. Mercer said the nerve damage was permanent. The nerve damage is permanent, Isaiah agreed. But the compensation patterns aren't. You've been locked up, not dead. Richard's face had gone pale. His hands shook as he stared at his leg. Then, before anyone could stop him, he pushed himself up. Richard, no. Evelyn lunged for him. But Richard was already rising from the wheelchair, his arms taking most of his weight, but his legs were attempting to support him. His left leg, the one Isaiah had worked on, held firm for a moment. His right leg buckled immediately, still locked in its own patterns, and Richard collapsed back into the chair. But for those 3 seconds, he'd been standing. The courtyard exploded into chaos. People shouted over each other. Someone started clapping. Another person yelled for a doctor. Marcus grabbed Isaiah by the arm, pulling him back from the wheelchair. Don't touch him again, Marcus warned. He assaulted Mr. Halvorson, someone called out. Did everyone see that? He assaulted him. Are you kidding? You just helped him, another voice argued. 2 more security guards appeared, moving toward Isaiah with purpose. Coach Brooks pushed through the crowd, tried to reach him, but the crush of people made it impossible. Call the police, Evelyn said, her voice high and scared. Someone call the police right now. For what? Richard stared at his wife, then at his own leg, which was still making small movements he hadn't been able to make in years. Evelyn, my foot is moving. You could have been hurt. He could have done permanent damage. She turned to the security guards. Detain him until the police arrive. Marcus tightened his grip on Isaiah's arm. Isaiah didn't resist. He'd known this would happen, or something like it. Adults didn't believe kids like him could know anything worth knowing. And when they were forced to see it, they got scared instead of grateful. It's a con, someone in the crowd declared. The kid probably faked it somehow. Special effects or something. I recorded the whole thing, a young man said, holding up his phone. His foot definitely moved. Muscle spasm, another person countered. My uncle had those after his stroke. Doesn't mean anything. Richard sat in his wheelchair, not speaking, his eyes locked on his left foot. His toes curled again, responding to his conscious thought for the first time since his accident. A single tear ran down his cheek, but his expression was hard to read. Not quite joy, not quite fear. Something complicated and overwhelming. The police arrived 15 minutes later, their lights flashing red and blue across the courtyard. The crowd had grown even larger, people from nearby restaurants and shops drawn by the commotion. Videos were already spreading across social media. Shaky phone footage of the moment Richard's foot moved, of him attempting to stand, of Isaiah being held by security. An officer approached, taking statements from multiple sources at once. Everyone had a different version of what happened. Assault, miracle, fraud, medical emergency. The officer looked exhausted, just trying to sort through it all. Did you touch this man? The officer asked Isaiah. Yes, sir. Did he give you permission? Isaiah hesitated. He said I could try to help him. He said it as a joke. Evelyn interjected. As a mockery. This boy took advantage of my husband's vulnerability. Ma'am, I need to speak with your husband directly. The officer moved toward Richard, who was still sitting in his wheelchair, still staring at his own foot. Sir, did this young man assault you? Richard looked up slowly, his eyes unfocused. What? Did he hurt you, sir? Richard's voice trailed off. He flexed his foot again, watching the movement like it was a magic trick. I don't know. You don't know if you were assaulted? I don't know what happened. Richard finally looked at Isaiah, and the expression on his face was raw, stripped of the earlier mockery. What did you do to me? Isaiah met his gaze steadily. I already told you. I reminded your body what it forgot. The officer sighed. I'm going to need you to come down to the station, son. We need to sort this out properly. He's 13. Coach Brooks said, finally making it through the crowd. He's a minor, and he didn't assault anyone. That man challenged him publicly, and he responded. And you are? Leonard Brooks. I've known this boy for 2 years. He wouldn't hurt anyone. That's what they all say, someone in the crowd muttered. The officer pulled out handcuffs and the crowd's energy shifted again. Some people protested, others approved. Isaiah let himself be led to the police car, his face calm even as his heart pounded. He'd seen the inside of police cars before. This wasn't new. What was new was the way Richard Halvorsen watched him go, his hand resting on his own knee, his fingers drumming an unconscious rhythm on skin that should have been numb. As the police car pulled away, Isaiah looked back at the glowing courtyard, at the crowd still arguing about what they'd witnessed. The string lights seemed dimmer now, or maybe that was just the distance. He'd known this would end badly. He'd known it before he'd knelt down, before he'd touched Richard's leg, maybe even before he'd opened his mouth to ask that first question. But he'd also known that Richard's body could remember what it was supposed to be. And for 3 seconds, watching that man stand, Isaiah had been right. The question was whether anyone else would admit it. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Isaiah sat in a gray interview room, his hands folded on the metal table, waiting. He'd been here for 3 hours now, moved from the holding area to this windowless room where 2 detectives had been questioning him in shifts. They seemed more confused than angry. Detective Maria Winters sat across from him, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a notepad filled with scribbled questions. Her partner, Detective James Chun, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Isaiah like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Let's go over this again," Winters said. "You're 13 years old. You have no permanent address, no legal guardian, and you claim you learned advanced anatomy from your grandmother." "I didn't claim anything," Isaiah said quietly. "You asked me how I knew what I knew. I told you, right?" Winters tapped her pen against the notepad. "And your grandmother, she was a doctor?" "No, ma'am." "Nurse?" "No." "Any medical certification at all?" Isaiah shook his head. "She just knew things. Her mother taught her. It goes back." "Goes back," Chin repeated from the wall. "Goes back where?" "I don't know exactly. Before my family had last names that anybody wrote down." The detectives exchanged glances. Winters leaned forward. "Isaiah, I'm going to be straight with you. We've got about 40 witnesses who saw you touch Richard Halvorsen. Half of them say you assaulted him. The other half say you performed some kind of medical procedure without a license, which is also illegal. His wife wants you charged. But here's what's tripping me up." She pulled out her phone and played a video. Isaiah recognized it immediately, the moment at the charity dinner, filmed from someone's cell phone. The angle was clear. You could see Isaiah's hands on Richard's leg, see the precise moment of adjustment, see Richard's foot straighten, see him stand for those 3 seconds. "That's not fake," Winters said. "We had 2 paramedics look at this footage. They can't explain it, but they confirmed his foot position changed. Significantly." She paused. "So either you got incredibly lucky, or you actually know what you're doing." "I know what I'm doing." "Then explain it to me. In detail. Because right now, you're looking at charges for practicing medicine without a license, and that's if we're being generous." Isaiah took a breath. His injury happened 3 years ago. Spinal compression at L4 and L5. The initial trauma caused his psoas and iliacus muscles to go into protective spasm. That's normal. The body tries to stabilize an injury. But his doctors only treated the spine. They never addressed the compensation patterns in his hips and pelvis. Over 3 years, those patterns became permanent. His left hip rotated anteriorly, creating a functional leg length discrepancy. That threw off his entire kinetic chain. Winter stopped writing and just stared. "The nerve damage to his legs is real," Isaiah continued. "But a lot of what he experiences as paralysis is actually his body protecting itself. It's locked up, not dead. When I adjusted his hip alignment and released the psoas, his nervous system remembered it had options. That's why his foot moved. I didn't heal him. I just gave his body permission to work the way it's supposed to." Chun pushed off from the wall. "Where did you learn those terms? Psoas, iliacus, kinetic chain. Those aren't words kids pick up on the street." "My father taught me. He used to work with fighters and athletes. People who couldn't afford doctors, but needed to keep their bodies working." "And where is your father now?" "Dead." Isaiah's voice stayed level. 6 years ago." The room went quiet. Winters closed her notepad. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." "No, it's not." She stood up. Listen, Isaiah, I don't know what's going to happen with this case. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence. Mr. Halvorsen hasn't officially pressed charges yet, but his lawyers are making noise. In the meantime, we're releasing you to temporary social services custody. I don't need social services. You're 13 and homeless. You don't get a choice. She softened slightly. There's someone here who vouched for you. Says he knows your background. The door opened and Coach Brooks walked in, looking older than Isaiah remembered. His face was drawn, worried lines deep around his eyes. You got 10 minutes, Winters said, leaving them alone. Brooks sat down heavily in the chair Winters had vacated. For a long moment, he just looked at Isaiah, shaking his head slowly. I told you not to, Brooks finally said. I know. I warned you what would happen. I know. Then why'd you do it, Isaiah? Why'd you put yourself out there like that? Isaiah thought about it. Because I could help. Because he needed it. Because I'm tired of knowing things and having to pretend I don't. Brooks sighed long and deep. Your father said the same thing. Right before they destroyed him. Tell me what happened to him. You never told me the whole story. Brooks was quiet for a moment, his hands clasped on the table. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. Your father, Marcus Cole, was the best physical trainer I ever saw. Not just good, extraordinary. He could watch an athlete move and diagnose problems before they became injuries. He could adjust a runner's gait and shave seconds off their time. He saved careers. But he was black, he was poor, and he didn't have the right pieces of paper. So they stopped him. Worse, they made an example of him. Brooks's jaw tightened. He was working with a college track team, unofficial consulting. One of the athletes improved so much, broke records, got scouted for the Olympics. The official team doctor, some white guy with all the credentials, claimed your father was giving illegal performance enhancements. Steroids, they said. Didn't matter that every test came back clean. They investigated him, smeared his name, threatened him with criminal charges. Isaiah felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened? He disappeared. Stopped taking clients, stopped working. Your grandmother said he died of a heart attack, but I always wondered. Man's spirit can only take so much breaking. Brooks met Isaiah's eyes. That's why I told you not to touch that millionaire. Because they'll do the same thing to you. They already are. As if on cue, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Raised voices, the sound of expensive shoes on linoleum. The door burst open and a man in a three-piece suit strode in, followed by Detective Winters looking annoyed. I said he gets 10 minutes, Winters protested. And I said my client has rights. The suited man placed a briefcase on the table and looked at Isaiah with the expression of someone examining a bug. I'm Robert Finch, attorney for Richard Halvorsen. You must be the child who assaulted my client. He didn't assault anyone, Brooks said, standing up. That's for the courts to decide. Finch pulled papers from his briefcase. I'm here to deliver a cease and desist order. Isaiah Cole is hereby forbidden from approaching Mr. Halvorsen, contacting him in any way, or making any public statements about the alleged incident. Alleged? Brooks's voice rose. There's 40 videos of what happened. Videos of an assault, yes. Finch's smile was thin. My client was vulnerable, in a wheelchair, and this child took advantage of that vulnerability to perform an unauthorized and dangerous physical manipulation. Mr. Halvorsen is currently under medical observation for potential neurological damage caused by this incident. Isaiah felt the words like a punch. I didn't cause damage. I helped him. Did you? Or did you trigger a temporary muscle spasm that Mr. Halvorsen and his medical team have been trying to reverse ever since? Finch's eyes were cold. Dr. Alan Mercer, one of the country's leading neurologists, has examined Mr. Halvorsen. His professional opinion is that you may have caused serious harm to my client's recovery. That's a lie, Isaiah said quietly. Que foule sont. Defamation can be added to your growing list of problems. Finch handed the papers to Winters. Deliver these, and understand that if this child comes anywhere near my client, we will pursue the fullest extent of criminal and civil penalties. He left as quickly as he'd arrived. Winters looked at the papers, then at Isaiah, her expression troubled. I didn't hurt him, Isaiah said. His foot moved. He stood up. "I know what I saw on that video," Winters said. "But I'm a cop, not a doctor. And right now, the doctors are saying something different." Over the next 3 days, the story exploded across local news and social media. But the narrative had shifted. What had started as a debate about a possible miracle became a story about a troubled child endangering a disabled man. Isaiah watched it unfold from the temporary group home where social services had placed him. The other kids there left him alone, sensing something different about him. He spent his time on the communal computer, reading article after article, watching his life get rewritten by people who'd never met him. "Street Kid claims miracle healing powers," read one headline. "Homeless boy assaults wheelchair-bound millionaire," said another. The worst was a local news interview with Dr. Alan Mercer. The doctor sat in a pristine office, his credentials displayed on the wall behind him, speaking with the calm authority of someone used to being believed. "What we witnessed was unfortunately not uncommon," Mercer explained to the interviewer. "Individuals, especially young people, sometimes develop delusional beliefs about having special abilities. This child clearly has some knowledge of anatomical terms, perhaps picked up from the internet or overheard conversations. But his actions were dangerous and could have caused permanent damage to Mr. Halvorson's delicate neural pathways." "But witnesses say they saw Mr. Halvorson's foot move," the interviewer pressed. "Muscle spasms," Mercer said smoothly. "Mr. Halvorson has been experiencing increased involuntary muscle activity since this incident. It's a concerning development that we're monitoring closely." What appeared to be movement was actually his body reacting to trauma. "So there's been no improvement?" "I'm afraid the opposite is true. Mr. Halvorson has reported increased pain and reduced sensation in his extremities. This incident may have set his recovery back significantly." Mercer's expression was grave, which is why it's so important that untrained individuals, no matter how well-meaning, never attempt to provide medical care. The consequences can be devastating. Isaiah turned off the computer. His hands were shaking. He knew what he'd felt beneath his fingers, knew what he'd accomplished. Richard Halvorson's body had responded because Isaiah had done it right, not wrong. But how could he prove it against someone like Dr. Mercer? That night, Isaiah slipped out of the group home. It wasn't difficult. The staff was overworked and the locks were basic. He made his way back to the network of abandoned buildings where he usually slept, needing the familiarity after days of institutional spaces. Coach Brooks was there, sitting on an old crate in the main room of the shell of what used to be a warehouse. A few other homeless people nodded at Isaiah as he entered. This was his real home, such as it was. "Thought you might show up," Brooks said. Isaiah sat down beside him. "Did you see the news?" "All of it. They're lying. Dr. Mercer is lying." "I know. So what do I do?" Brooks was quiet for a long time. "Your father used to ask me that same question. I told him to fight, to prove them wrong, to show the world what he could do." He looked at Isaiah, his eyes red-rimmed. "I gave him bad advice. Fighting them just gave them more ammunition. Every time he defended himself, they twisted his words. Every success story he shared, they found a way to discredit. By the end, he was so focused on being right that he forgot to protect himself. You're saying I should give up. I'm saying you should be smart. These people, Mercer, the lawyers, the Halvorsons, they have power. They control the narrative. You're a 13-year-old homeless black kid. In this fight, you started at a disadvantage so big, it's almost impossible to overcome." Isaiah felt tears burning behind his eyes, but refused to let them fall. "So, I'm just supposed to let them win? Let them say I hurt someone when I helped him? I'm saying survival matters more than being right." But Isaiah wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Not when he'd seen Richard Halvorson's foot move. Not when he knew what his father and grandmother and all the people before them had been capable of. Not when the truth was so clear, even if no one wanted to see it. The next morning, Isaiah woke to shouting. The police had raided the warehouse, rousing everyone out. As Isaiah stumbled into the gray dawn, he saw social workers waiting with the officers. Isaiah Cole, a young social worker, called, checking her clipboard. "You're in violation of your placement terms. We need you to come with us. I just needed to sleep somewhere I knew. You need to follow the rules." Her voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "The judge has ordered you to remain in supervised housing while the investigation continues. Investigation. The word hung in the air like a threat. Isaiah let them take him back to the group home, but he understood now. They weren't trying to help him. They were containing him. Meanwhile, in a penthouse apartment across the city, Richard Halvorson sat alone in his study at 3 in the morning, staring at his left foot. It had moved again. Twice tonight. Not a spasm. He knew what those felt like. This was different. This was control, however brief. He'd managed to flex his ankle, just slightly, and hold it for 5 full seconds. The longest yet. He hadn't told Evelyn. Hadn't told Dr. Mercer. Hadn't told anyone. Because if he admitted that the kid was right, that Isaiah had actually helped him, then everything else fell apart. The lawsuit. The cease and desist. The public narrative that protected Richard's dignity and his doctor's reputations. Richard thought about that moment in the courtyard, the way Isaiah had looked at him before kneeling down. The boy had said, "You won't like what happens after." Richard had laughed at the time. The joke seemed cruel now, a bitter prophecy coming true. His phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer. "Finch, press is asking for statement. Maintain position. Boy was dangerous. Mercer is monitoring your decline. Any contradiction undermines our case." Our case. As if Richard had asked for any of this. He stood up from his wheelchair, something he'd been practicing in private, and managed to take 2 shaking steps before his right leg buckled. Still not enough. But it was progress. Undeniable progress that he couldn't acknowledge without destroying the narrative that was currently protecting him from embarrassment. The cost of pride, Richard thought. The cost of being wrong in public. Across town, in a cramped apartment, investigative journalist Mara Finch sat at her laptop, reviewing footage from the charity dinner for the 20th time. She'd been at the event covering what she thought would be a boring piece about wealth inequality, but she'd captured the entire incident with Isaiah and Richard Halvorson. Something didn't add up. She'd interviewed Dr. Mercer for her initial piece, and his certainty about the boy causing harm had seemed too smooth, too prepared, like a script he'd rehearsed. Now, reviewing the medical literature on spinal injuries and compensation patterns, she was starting to understand why. If Isaiah was right, if Mercer and the other specialists had been treating Richard's injury without addressing the underlying mechanical issues, then the entire medical establishment had been failing one of their most high-profile patients for 3 years. That kind of failure didn't just embarrass doctors. It threatened reputations, hospital positions, research funding, and legal liability. Mara pulled up Isaiah's background. No father listed on recent records. Mother deceased. Grandmother deceased. No permanent address. The system had swallowed this kid whole, and now powerful people were working to make sure he stayed swallowed. She opened a new document and started typing. This wasn't the story she'd planned to write, but it was the one that mattered. If Isaiah was telling the truth, and her instincts, honed by 10 years of investigative journalism, suggested he was, then a lot of powerful people had a lot of reasons to shut him up. The question was whether anyone would listen to his side before it was too late. 2 weeks after the incident, Isaiah received word that Richard Halvorson wanted to see him. Privately. The message came through Detective Winters, who seemed as surprised by the request as Isaiah was. His lawyers are furious, Winters explained, driving Isaiah to the meeting location. Apparently, Mr. Halvorson insisted. Said he'd dropped the protective order for this one conversation, supervised by me. They met in a private room at a medical facility, neutral ground. Richard sat in his wheelchair, though Isaiah noticed he looked different, more upright, less strained. His left foot rested flat on the footrest instead of turned inward. Evelyn was there too, standing behind her husband like a sentinel, her face tight with barely concealed anger. Detective Winters positioned herself by the door. 10 minutes, Winters said, and I'm here the whole time. Richard nodded. For a long moment, he just looked at Isaiah. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than at the charity dinner, stripped to the performance. I need to understand what you did. Isaiah glanced at Evelyn, then at Winters, unsure how much he was allowed to say. Richard caught the look. Speak freely. This conversation is off the record. I gave my word. You've been moving more, Isaiah said carefully. Haven't you? Richard's jaw tightened. Yes. Richard, you don't have to admit. Evelyn started, but Richard raised a hand. I do have to admit it. To him, at least. He looked back at Isaiah. Every day since that night, I've had more control. Not much. Not enough to matter publicly, but enough to know that something changed. Dr. Mercer says it's coincidence. That my body was already improving and your intervention was just badly timed. Do you believe that? No. The word came out flat, honest. I don't. I felt what happened. I felt something unlock. And I need to know if you can do it again. Evelyn stepped forward. Absolutely not. We're here so you can have closure, Richard, not to let this child experiment on you again. He's not experimenting, Richard said, his eyes still on Isaiah. Are you? Isaiah shook his head. I know what I'm doing, but I can't do it halfway. If you want real improvement, it requires work, daily work. And it means admitting your doctors have been treating you wrong for 3 years. That's slander, Evelyn snapped. No, Richard said slowly. It's the truth, isn't it? He leaned forward. I've spent millions on Dr. Mercer. State-of-the-art facilities, experimental treatments. And in 3 years, I've made no progress. Zero. Then you, a kid with nothing, touch me for 30 seconds, and I move my foot for the first time since the accident. So either you're the luckiest person alive, or everyone I've been paying is wrong. They're not wrong about everything, Isaiah said carefully. Your nerve damage is real. You'll never be exactly who you were before. But they treated your spine and ignored everything else. Your whole body compensated for the injury. Those compensations became the real prison. I didn't heal your nerves. I just unlocked the compensation patterns so your nerves could work with what they still have. Richard closed his eyes. Can you do it again? Can you finish what you started? Richard, if you do this, we lose everything, Evelyn said, her voice rising. The lawsuit, the narrative, our credibility. People will think you lied. I did lie. Richard opened his eyes. I've been lying for 2 weeks. To everyone, including myself. He looked at his wife, and something sad crossed his face. I've spent 3 years being angry at a body that failed me. Maybe it's time to be angry at the people who told me I couldn't get better. Evelyn's face went pale. You're choosing this child over Dr. Mercer? Over our lawyers? Over me? I'm choosing to walk again, Evelyn. If that's possible. He turned back to Isaiah. But you said something at the dinner. You said I wouldn't like what happens after. What did you mean? Isaiah chose his words carefully. Healing isn't like surgery. It's not something I do to you while you sleep. It means working every day. It means pain. It means admitting when you're scared or frustrated instead of pretending everything's fine. And it means changing not just your body, but how you think about it. And if I'm not willing to do that, then you stay exactly where you are. The room was silent. Detective Winters shifted by the door, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the conversation. Evelyn looked like she might cry or scream. Isaiah couldn't tell which. Finally, Richard spoke. I have conditions. Okay. This happens privately. No câmeras, no witnesses, no publicity. I need to know if it really works before I blow up my entire life defending you publicly. That's fair. If it doesn't work, if nothing improves, you disappear. You don't speak to the press. You don't defend yourself. You take whatever the courts give you. Deal. Isaiah considered. It was an impossible bargain, really. Richard was asking him to gamble everything on a process that required the millionaire's commitment, not just Isaiah's skill. If Richard didn't do the work, Isaiah would take the fall. But it was the only chance he'd get. Deal, Isaiah said. But I have one condition too. Richard's eyebrows rose. You're in no position to negotiate. I'm if you want my help. Isaiah met his eyes steadily. When it works, not if, when you tell the truth. All of it. You don't protect Dr. Mercer's reputation. You don't pretend your doctors were right. You tell people what happened. That a poor black kid knew something they didn't. That could ruin careers. They're already trying to ruin mine. The silence stretched between them, weighted with everything unsaid. Finally, Richard extended his hand. His grip was stronger than Isaiah expected, the hand of someone who'd been secretly doing exercises, rebuilding strength. Deal, Richard said. But understand something, Isaiah. If you're wrong, if this doesn't work, it won't just be your reputation that suffers. It'll confirm everything they're saying about you. That you're delusional, dangerous, that kids like you shouldn't be trusted with power you don't understand. Understand power better than you think, Isaiah said quietly. I've watched powerful people ignore the truth my whole life. I'm used to it. Something flickered in Richard's expression. Guilt maybe, or recognition. Evelyn made a disgusted sound and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Detective Winters watched her go, then looked at Richard. Mr. Halvorson, are you sure about this? No, Richard admitted. But I'm sure about what staying the same means. And I don't think I can live with that anymore. As Detective Winters drove Isaiah back to the group home, he stared out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere out there, Dr. Mercer was protecting his reputation. Richard's lawyers were planning their next move. Evelyn was probably calling everyone she knew, trying to contain the damage. And Isaiah was gambling his future on the chance that truth mattered more than power. He thought about his father, destroyed by people who refused to see what he could do. He thought about his grandmother, teaching him in secret because the world wasn't ready to learn from people like them. He thought about all the knowledge buried under prejudice and pride, all the healing that never happened because the wrong people knew how to do it. Richard Halvorson had said Isaiah wouldn't like what happened after. He'd been right about that. But what Richard didn't understand yet was that Isaiah had already decided some things were worth fighting for, even when you knew you'd probably lose. Truth was one of them. The memory of his father was another. And the possibility, however small, that one day people like him wouldn't have to hide what they knew just to survive. That was worth risking everything, even if everything was all he had. The first real session happened 3 days later in the basement gym of Richard's estate, a space designed for his rehabilitation but rarely used. Isaiah arrived before dawn, smuggled in through a service entrance by Marcus, the same security guard who detained him at the charity dinner. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Richard was already there, sitting in his wheelchair near the exercise mats, dressed in athletic clothes that looked expensive and barely worn. The room smelled like disinfectant and unused equipment. Early morning light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. "You're early," Richard said. "So are you." "Couldn't sleep." Richard wheeled himself closer. "Had too much time to think about what I'm risking." Isaiah set down the small bag he brought, borrowed from the group home. It contained nothing medical, just a notebook where he'd sketched diagrams of the human body, learned from his grandmother's teachings. "Are you ready to work?" "I don't know. Am I?" "That's not a question I can answer." Isaiah knelt on the mat, eye level with Richard now. "The deal was you do the work. Not that you try, not that you think about it. That you actually do it. Every day, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've done physical therapy for 3 years. I know about pain." "No, you know about exercises." "That's different." Isaiah moved closer. "Your therapist treated your body like a machine with broken parts. Replace this, strengthen that, work around the damage. But your body isn't broken. It's afraid. It's been protecting itself for so long. It forgot how to stop. You talk like my body has a mind of its own. It does. A better one than your conscious mind, usually." Isaiah reached out slowly. "May I?" Richard nodded, tense. Isaiah placed his hands on Richard's shoulders, feeling the asymmetry immediately. The right side sat higher, tighter, 3 years of compensation locked into the muscles and fascia. "Close your eyes," Isaiah said. "Tell me what you feel. Your hands. Deeper than that. What does your body feel?" Richard was quiet for a moment. "Nothing. That's the problem. Everything below my waist is just absent. That's what you've been told to feel. Now stop thinking and actually feel." Isaiah pressed gently into the tight muscles at the base of Richard's neck. "Your right shoulder is screaming. Has been for years. You just learned to ignore it." "I don't." Richard stopped, his eyes opening in surprise. "Actually, yes. It aches. Constantly. I thought that was just normal now. Nothing about your current state is normal. It's all compensation." Isaiah moved his hands lower, tracing the spine. "Your injury was here." He pressed lightly at the lumbar region. "But the real damage happened everywhere else. Your body tried to protect this spot, and in doing so, it locked up everything around it. Your hips, your thoracic spine, your shoulders, even your jaw. Everything tightened to create a cage around the injury. So what do I do? First, you stop lying to yourself about what you feel. Isaiah sat back. Every time your body sends you a signal, pain, discomfort, sensation you don't expect, you need to acknowledge it instead of pushing it away. That's the only way to rebuild communication between your brain and your body. Richard nodded slowly. Okay, what else? This. Isaiah stood and demonstrated a movement that looked deceptively simple, a controlled rotation of the hips while keeping the shoulders stable. 3 sets of 10 every morning. It's going to hurt in places you didn't know you had. That's it? That's the miracle cure. There's no miracle cure. That's the point. Isaiah met his eyes steadily. This is going to take months, maybe years, and it requires you being honest about every sensation, every fear, every moment when you want to quit. Can you do that? Richard stared at the movement Isaiah had demonstrated, something so basic as old physical therapists had probably never even assigned it. But there was something in the way Isaiah had moved, a precision and intentionality that suggested hidden complexity. I can try. Not good enough. Yes or no? The challenge hung in the air. Richard felt anger flash through him. Who was this kid to demand anything from him? But then he remembered his foot moving, remembered standing for those precious seconds, remembered 3 years of expensive failures. Yes, Richard said. I'll do it. Then let's begin. The first session lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Richard was drenched in sweat, trembling, and furious. This is impossible, he gasped, collapsed in his wheelchair after attempting the hip rotation exercise. His body had seized up halfway through, muscles spasming in ways he hadn't experienced since the injury. You said this would help. I feel worse. You feel more. Isaiah corrected, not even breathing hard. That's different than worse. The hell it is. Everything hurts. My back, my hips, my legs, places I couldn't even feel before are screaming now. Good. That means they're waking up. This is exactly what Dr. Mercer warned me about. Richard's voice rose. Increased pain, disrupted nerve signals, setting back my recovery. You don't know what you're doing. You're a kid playing doctor with someone's life. Isaiah didn't react to the outburst. He'd expected it. You hire Dr. Mercer to make you comfortable while staying the same. You hire me to change. Change hurts. If you wanted comfort, you should have stayed in your air-conditioned living room. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I'm being honest. Something your other doctors won't do because you pay them too much. Isaiah started packing his notebook. If you want to quit, quit. Break the deal. Go back to your expensive therapy that doesn't work. But don't waste my time pretending you want to heal when you really just want someone to tell you it's okay to give up. Richard wanted to scream at him, wanted to have Marcus throw him out, wanted to call his lawyers and restart the lawsuit. But instead, he looked down at his left leg, the one that had been completely still for 3 years, and watched his toes curl. Slightly, imperfectly, but undeniably real. Tomorrow, Richard said quietly. Same time, Isaiah paused at the door. Tomorrow. But understand something, it gets harder before it gets easier. And if you quit when it's hard, you prove everyone who doubted you right, including yourself. He left before Richard could respond. That afternoon, while Richard lay on a heating pad trying to calm his screaming muscles, Isaiah returned to the group home to find 2 police cars parked outside. His stomach dropped. Detective Winters stood in the common room with the facility director, both looking grim. When Isaiah entered, Winters gestured for him to follow her outside. We need to talk, she said. They sat in her unmarked car, the windows down to let in the cool afternoon breeze. Winters pulled out a tablet and showed Isaiah a series of photos. Security camera footage from Richard's estate, time-stamped from that morning. Someone leaked these, Winters said. They're all over social media now. You and Mr. Halvorson, alone, in what looks like a private medical session. Isaiah felt his chest tighten. I know what you were doing. The question is who's watching you do it. She swiped to another image, this one showing Isaiah's hands on Richard's shoulders. Mr. Halvorson's lawyers are furious. They're calling this a violation of the cease and desist, claiming you manipulated him into private meetings. He asked me to come. He wanted my help. I believe you. But belief doesn't matter in court. Winters put the tablet away. There's more. Dr. Mercer gave another interview this morning. He's claiming that Mr. Halvorson's reported increased pain and mobility issues are direct results of your interventions. He's recommending criminal charges for reckless endangerment and practicing medicine without a license. Of course he is. Isaiah stared out the window. Because if I'm right, his entire career is built on failure. Maybe, but he's got credentials, expert witnesses, and hospital backing. You've got nothing. She paused. No, that's not true. You've got me wondering if the experts might be wrong. But that's not enough. Isaiah turned to look at her. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful. Someone at that estate is documenting everything you do. Those cameras weren't hidden, they were obvious. Which means someone wanted you to see them or didn't care if you did. Either way, you're being set up. By who? If I had to guess, Mrs. Halvorson. She's got the most to lose if her husband suddenly gets better thanks to a homeless kid instead of expensive doctors. Status, credibility, the narrative she's built about being the devoted wife of a disabled man. All of it crumbles if you succeed. Isaiah hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on the healing, on proving his knowledge meant something, that he hadn't considered how many people needed him to fail. What do I do? Winters was quiet for a moment. Honestly, walk away. Take the loss. Disappear before they build a case you can't fight. I can't do that. Can't or won't. Both. Isaiah met her eyes. My father walked away. He let them destroy his reputation without fighting back because people told him it was safer. He died broken. I'm not doing that. Your father was an adult. You're 13. There's a difference. Not in how much they'll hurt me for knowing things I'm not supposed to know. Winters sighed, long and heavy. Then at least be smart about it. No more private sessions without witnesses you trust. Document everything. And for God's sake, stop assuming Richard Halvorson is on your side just because you can help him. Rich people protect themselves first. Always. That night, Isaiah couldn't sleep. He lay in his assigned bunk at the group home, staring at the ceiling, thinking about cameras and leaks and the web of people working to trap him. His father's face kept appearing in his mind, the way he'd looked near the end, defeated, silent, disappearing into himself. Around midnight, Isaiah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Meet me. We need to talk. MB. Mara Finch, the journalist. Isaiah had seen her articles starting to shift tone, asking harder questions about Dr. Mercer's treatment history, about the medical establishment's handling of Richard's case. She'd requested an interview twice. Isaiah had ignored both requests. He texted back, why? The response came immediately, because I found your father's files. All of them, including what they did to destroy him. Isaiah was out of bed and dressed in minutes. They met at an all-night diner on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where nobody asked questions if you nursed a coffee for hours. Mara sat in a corner booth, a laptop and several folders spread across the table. She was younger than Isaiah expected, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. You came, she said as Isaiah slid into the booth. You said you found files about my father. I did. Mara pushed a folder across the table. Marcus Cole, physical trainer, unlicensed. Worked with college athletes, local fighters, people rehabbing from injuries. By all accounts, he was extraordinary. Athletes he trained had fewer injuries, faster recovery times, longer careers. Then he helped a runner named David Phillips. Isaiah opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, medical records, legal documents. His father's name appeared throughout, but the tone shifted dramatically over the course of 6 months. From innovative trainer to suspected performance enhancer to dangerous unlicensed practitioner. David Phillips broke 3 state records, Mara continued. Got scouted for Olympic trials. The team's official physician, Dr. Harrison Chun, couldn't explain the improvement. So instead of admitting your father might know something he didn't, Chun started a whisper campaign. Steroids, illegal supplements, dangerous practices. No evidence, but it didn't matter. The athletic commission investigated your father, found nothing illegal, but the damage was done. I know this part, Isaiah said quietly. He lost all his clients. No one would work with him, because Dr. Chun made sure of it. But here's what you don't know. Mara pulled up a document on her laptop. I found Chin's private correspondence, emails to other doctors, medical board members, hospital administrators. He wasn't just protecting his ego. He was protecting his system, your father's methods, addressing compensation patterns, treating bodies holistically instead of symptomatically, threatened the entire physical therapy and sports medicine industry. If a black man with no credentials could get better results than licensed professionals, what did that say about the gatekeeping? Isaiah felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. They destroyed him to protect themselves. Yes, and they're doing it again. To you. Mara turned the laptop so Isaiah could see the screen. Articles, social media posts, medical blogs, all attacking Isaiah's credibility, his knowledge, his right to even suggest he understood anything about healing. Dr. Mercer's name appeared repeatedly, always as the voice of authority and reason. Dr. Alan Mercer was one of the doctors who signed off on your father's investigation, Mara said. He's been part of this protective system for decades. And now you've threatened him twice. Once by succeeding where he failed, and again by exposing that failure publicly. So what do? You let me tell your story. The real one. Your father's story, your knowledge, what actually happened at that charity dinner. Mara leaned forward. I've been investigating Dr. Mercer for 3 weeks. I found patterns. Other practitioners he's helped discredit. Patients whose improvement stalled under his care. Suppressed research about alternative approaches to spinal injury. He's not just protecting his reputation with you. He's protecting a career built on gatekeeping and maintaining the status quo. Isaiah wanted to trust her, but trusting people had rarely worked out well for him. Why do you care? Because I'm tired of watching powerful people bury the truth. Mara's voice was fierce, and because your father deserved better. So do you. Before Isaiah could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Richard's number. Emergency session. Come now. Isaiah showed Mara the message. She frowned. Be careful. This could be a setup, or he could actually need help, which is exactly what they're counting on. But Isaiah was already standing. Whatever trap might be waiting, he couldn't ignore the possibility that Richard genuinely needed him. That was the curse of caring about healing. You couldn't turn it off just because it was dangerous. He arrived at Richard's estate 40 minutes later. The house was dark except for lights in the basement gym. Marcus wasn't at the door. No one stopped Isaiah as he made his way through the silent house and downstairs. Richard was on the floor, not in his wheelchair, trying to push himself up. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His face was twisted in pain and frustration. What happened? Isaiah rushed over. I was practicing. The exercises you showed me. Something locked up. Richard's voice was strained. My right hip. Can't move it. Can't even get back in the chair. Isaiah knelt beside him, hands already assessing. Richard's right hip was indeed locked, muscles in severe spasm. The kind of protective response that happened when someone pushed too hard, too fast. You overdid it. I was trying to progress faster. Thought if I pushed through the pain. That's exactly what you shouldn't do. Isaiah worked carefully, finding the trigger points that might release the spasm. Your body locks up when it's scared. Pushing harder just makes it more scared. So I'm supposed to go slower? Be weaker. You're supposed to listen. Isaiah pressed firmly into the hip flexor, feeling for the release. Strength isn't about force. It's about communication. Your body is trying to tell you something, and you're ignoring it. Richard hissed in pain as Isaiah worked deeper. I don't have time for slow. Every day I wait, Mercer gets louder. My lawyers get pushier. Evelyn gets more suspicious. I need results I can point to. Why? Who are you trying to prove yourself to? Everyone. Myself. You. Richard's voice cracked. 3 years, Isaiah. 3 years of being helpless. Of having people do everything for me. Of being looked at with pity or disgust. If I could just walk again, really walk, none of that would matter anymore. Isaiah paused, understanding hitting him. You think walking will fix how people see you? Won't it? No, because the problem isn't your legs. It's that you believed everyone who said you were broken. Isaiah sat back. Your body can relearn. But if your mind still thinks you're helpless, you'll find new ways to be broken. Richard stared at him, something raw in his expression. You sound like a therapist. I sound like someone who's watched people give up on themselves. Isaiah stood. The spasm will release on its own in a few hours. Use ice, not heat. And tomorrow, we go back to the basics. No rusing. No proving anything. Just work. Isaiah. What? Richard struggled for words. Thank you. For coming. For not giving up on me, even though I'm making this harder than it needs to be. Isaiah looked at the millionaire sprawled on his expensive gym floor, vulnerable in a way cameras would never capture. That's what healing looks like. Messy and hard, and nothing like the story people want to tell about it. He left Richard there, knowing the cameras had caught everything, knowing it would be used against him somehow, but also knowing that healing wasn't about optics or protection. It was about showing up, even when showing up was dangerous. The lawsuit landed 3 days later. Isaiah was called into the group home director's office and handed papers by a process server who looked apologetic. The legal language was dense, but the core message was clear. Richard and Evelyn Halvorsen were suing Isaiah Cole for negligent infliction of emotional distress, unauthorized medical treatment, and fraud. They were seeking damages in excess of $2 million. They're saying you caused psychological harm through false promises, the group home director explained, looking pale, and that your continued contact with Mr. Halvorsen violates multiple court orders. But he asked me to come. Isaiah protested. He texted me. There's no text in evidence. And Mr. Halvorsen's statement says you showed up uninvited and manipulated him during a moment of vulnerability. Isaiah felt the floor drop out from under him. Richard had lied. Completely, thoroughly lied. That same day, the media exploded with a new interview. Richard Halvorsen, sitting in his wheelchair in his lavish living room, speaking to a sympathetic reporter about being victimized by a disturbed child who'd exploited his desperation. I wanted to believe, Richard said on camera, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. I was vulnerable, in pain, and this young man seemed so confident. But the truth is, he's made everything worse. My doctors are trying to undo the damage, but I may never recover what I've lost. Beside him, Evelyn nodded, dabbing at her eyes. We just want to warn other families. Don't let desperation make you vulnerable to people who claim they have answers the medical establishment doesn't recognize. There are reasons those people aren't recognized. Dr. Mercer appeared in the same news segment, his expression grave. This is unfortunately a pattern we see. Individuals with no training, no accountability, causing real harm to vulnerable patients. Isaiah Cole is not a miracle worker. He's a danger to public health. Isaiah watched the interview on the group home computer, surrounded by other kids who'd gathered to see what all the commotion was about. Someone laughed. Someone else whispered. Isaiah felt their eyes on him, judging, believing what they saw on screen, because why wouldn't they? Richard Halvorsen was rich and respected. Isaiah was nobody. His phone rang. Mara Finch. Did you see it? She asked. Everyone saw it. He's lying. You know that, right? I've been tracking his physical therapy appointments. He canceled 3 of them this week. People don't cancel therapy when they're getting worse. Doesn't matter what's true. Matters what people believe. Then let me publish what I've found. Your father's story, the pattern of Mercer destroying practitioners who threaten him, the evidence that Richard is actually improving. And then what? Isaiah's voice was flat. You publish, they discredit you. Say you're biased. Say you're making it up. I'll still be the homeless black kid who heard a disabled millionaire. That's the story they want, so that's the story that wins. Isaiah, thank you for trying, but I'm done fighting. He hung up before she could argue. That night, Coach Brooks found Isaiah at the abandoned warehouse, sitting alone in the dark. Brooks lowered himself onto the crate beside Isaiah with a grunt. His breathing labored. Heard about the lawsuit, Brooks said. Isaiah didn't respond. Also heard Richard Halvorsen is a lying coward who's protecting himself by destroying you. That's about right. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Brooks spoke again, his voice rough. Your father, toward the end, he told me something. Said he regretted fighting, regretted putting himself out there, trying to prove what he could do. Said he should have just helped people quietly and stayed invisible. Sounds like good advice. It was the saddest thing I ever heard him say. Brooks looked at Isaiah. Because he was right. Staying invisible would have kept him safe. But it also would have meant all that knowledge, all that capability dying with him. No one passing it on. No one even knowing it existed. He passed it to me. Look where that got us. He passed it to you because he believes some truths are worth the cost of speaking them. Brooks coughed, a wet sound that made Isaiah look at him with concern. Even if you lose, even if they destroy you, the truth still happened. That counts for something. Does it? I don't know. But I know your father died thinking he failed. Died believing the world was better off if people like him stayed quiet. Brooks put a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. Don't die thinking that. Even if they win, don't give them that. Isaiah felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. I don't know how to fight this. They have everything. Money, lawyers, credibility. I have nothing. You have what you've always had. Knowledge they can't take away, even if they refuse to see it. Brooks stood slowly, wincing. And you've got stubborn hope. That's more dangerous to them than anything else. The next morning, Isaiah woke to sirens. Coach Brooks had collapsed during the night. Respiratory failure, the paramedics said. He was at City Hospital, critical condition. Isaiah got the news from another resident of the warehouse, delivered through a group home social worker who looked uncomfortable being the messenger. Can I see him? Isaiah asked. The hospital is aware of your legal situation. They've been advised not to allow you near any patients without supervision. Of course they had. Even dying, Brooks was off limits to the dangerous kid who hurt people. Isaiah spent the day in a fog, attended the mandatory group sessions, ate lunch without tasting it, avoided the looks from other kids who'd seen the news. When evening came, he slipped out of the group home again. He was getting good at that, and made his way to City Hospital. He couldn't get past the main desk. Security had his description. They escorted him out politely, but firmly. Isaiah stood in the parking lot, staring up at the lit windows, wondering which one held Brooks, whether he was alone, whether he knew Isaiah had tried. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Isaiah Cole. A woman's voice, professional cold. Yes. This is Sandra Wilson, representing the Halvorson family. We're calling to offer you a settlement. Isaiah's heart hammered. What kind of settlement? Drop any claims of helping Mr. Halvorson. Sign an NDA preventing you from discussing the case publicly. In exchange, we'll drop the lawsuit and provide $20,000 for your emancipation and living expenses. $22,000. More money than Isaiah had ever imagined having. Enough to get a place to live, go to school, start over somewhere new. All he had to do was admit he'd been wrong. Admit his father's knowledge was worthless. Admit everything they'd said about him was true. I need to think about it, Isaiah said. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with the full lawsuit. Wilson paused. Take the deal, Isaiah. You can't win this fight. Save yourself while you still can. She hung up. Isaiah stood in the hospital parking lot, phone in hand, the weight of the decision crushing him. 24 hours to choose between truth and survival, between his father's memory and his own future, between being right and being safe. Inside the hospital, Coach Brooks fought for breath, dreaming of track meets and young athletes, and a man named Marcus Cole who'd once been able to heal with his hands. And across the city, in his private study, Richard Halvorson stood without his wheelchair for 42 seconds, his longest yet, before sitting down to practice the lie he'd tell tomorrow. Isaiah didn't sleep that night. He sat in the group home common room, staring at his phone, watching the hours count down to the settlement deadline. $20,000 or a lawsuit he couldn't afford to fight. Silence or destruction. At 4 a.m, Mara Finch's name lit up his screen. Don't take the settlement, she said before he could speak. How did you know about that? Because I know how these people operate. They're scared, Isaiah. Really scared. And I can prove why. Her voice was urgent, alive with something electric. I found Dr. Mercer's patient files. The real ones, not the sanitized versions. Richard Halvorson isn't the first person he's kept dependent. There's a pattern going back 15 years. Patients who should have improved but didn't, all while Mercer collected fees and published papers about their complex cases. Isaiah's throat tightened. How did you get his files? A nurse. Someone who's been watching him bury people's progress for years and finally got tired of it. Mara paused. I'm publishing tomorrow morning. All of it. Your father's case, the pattern of practitioners Mercer's destroyed, the suppressed research, everything. But I need you to go on record. I need you to not take that settlement. If I don't take it, they'll destroy me in court. They'll try. But with what I'm publishing, the whole narrative shifts. This stops being about a troubled kid and becomes about a system protecting itself. Her voice softened. I know I'm asking you to risk everything, but your father never got this chance. He fought alone. You don't have to. Isaiah thought about Brooks in the hospital, about his father dying broken, about 3 generations of knowledge being called worthless because the wrong people possessed it. He thought about Richard Halvorson standing for 42 seconds and then lying about it on television. Okay, Isaiah said. I won't take the settlement. Good, because there's one more thing. Mara's tone shifted, became harder. Richard Halvorson is going to testify tomorrow at a preliminary hearing for your case. And I think he's going to tell the truth. Why would he do that? Because his physical therapist called me yesterday. Off the record, terrified, but couldn't stay quiet anymore. Richard's been improving dramatically, walking unassisted in private sessions. His therapist documented everything because she knew something was wrong with the public story. She's willing to testify if it comes to that. Isaiah felt something crack open in his chest. Hope, maybe, or just the possibility that truth could matter after all. The courthouse was smaller than Isaiah expected, less grand. He sat in the gallery beside Mara, wearing clothes borrowed from the group home that didn't quite fit. Across the aisle, Evelyn Halvorson sat rigid and furious, flanked by lawyers. Dr. Mercer occupied a row behind them, his expression serene and confident. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Angela Morrison, reviewed the preliminary motions with barely concealed skepticism. She'd read Mara's article, published just 2 hours earlier. Everyone had. This is highly irregular, Richard's lead attorney was saying. The publication of inflammatory and unverified allegations on the morning of a hearing. The allegations are verified, Mara called from the gallery. I have documentation. Ms. Finch, you're not a party to this case, Judge Morrison said, but her tone wasn't hostile. However, given the nature of the claims in your article and their direct bearing on this matter, I'm inclined to hear testimony before ruling on the preliminary motions. She looked at the defense table where Isaiah sat with his court-appointed attorney, an overworked public defender named James Carter. Mr. Carter, does your client wish to testify? He does, Your Honor. Then we'll begin there. Judge Morrison settled back. But first, I have questions for the plaintiff. Mr. Halvorson approached the witness stand. The courtroom went still. Richard, who'd been sitting quietly in the front row, looked at his lawyers in confusion. One of them leaned in, whispering urgently, but Judge Morrison's voice cut through. Now, Mr. Halvorson. Richard wheeled himself to the witness stand. The bailiff swore him in. Judge Morrison studied him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Halvorson, are you currently able to move your left foot independently? Silence. Heavy, damning silence. Mr. Halvorson? Yes, Richard said quietly. I can. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's face went white. Dr. Mercer leaned forward, his serenity cracking. And when did you regain this ability? The night of the charity dinner. After Isaiah Cole adjusted my hip. Yet you've testified publicly multiple times that his intervention caused you harm and increased your disability. Was that testimony truthful? Richard's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. No, Your Honor, it wasn't. Your Honor, my client is clearly under duress. One of Richard's lawyers began, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a look. Mr. Halvorson, I'm going to ask you directly. Have you experienced improvement in your mobility and sensation since Isaiah Cole's intervention? Yes. Significant improvement? Richard closed his eyes. I can stand. I can walk short distances. My sensation has returned in areas that were completely numb for 3 years. My pain has decreased. My quality of life has improved in every measurable way. The courtroom erupted. Lawyers shouted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Evelyn stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. He's lying. He's being manipulated by that boy. Mrs. Halvorson, sit down. Judge Morrison's voice was steel. Mr. Halvorson, why did you file this lawsuit if the defendant actually helped you? Richard's face was gray, aged 10 years and moments. Because I was afraid. Afraid of admitting I'd been wrong. Afraid of what it would mean for my doctors, my treatment, my entire understanding of my injury. Afraid that a 13-year-old kid knew more than the specialists I'd paid millions. His voice cracked, and because people I trusted told me that protecting myself mattered more than telling the truth. He looked at Evelyn, at Dr. Mercer, at his lawyers. Then, at Isaiah. I'm sorry, Richard said. I offered you $1 million as a joke. You earned it as truth, and I repaid you with lies. Judge Morrison let the silence settle before speaking. Dr. Mercer, you're listed as an expert witness for the plaintiff. Do you wish to testify? Mercer stood slowly, his composure returning. Your Honor, what we're seeing is a vulnerable man experiencing a temporary placebo response and confusing it with actual medical improvement. My clinical assessment. Your clinical assessment has been wrong for 3 years, Judge Morrison interrupted. According to Ms. Finch's article, which cites multiple sources, including Mr. Halvorson's own physical therapist, you've documented his lack of progress while billing for ongoing treatment. You've dismissed improvement as impossible while collecting fees for managing his hopelessness. Is that accurate? That's a gross mischaracterization. Is it accurate that you were involved in discrediting Marcus Cole 15 years ago? Mercer's face hardened. That was a completely different situation. The man was practicing without a license, like his son allegedly is now. Judge Morrison's gaze was unforgiving. Doctor, it seems to me that you have a pattern of using your credentials to silence people whose knowledge threatens your authority. That's not medicine. That's gatekeeping. With respect, Your Honor, a courtroom is not the place to debate medical standards. You made it the place when you supported a fraudulent lawsuit. Judge Morrison turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that I'm dismissing all charges against Isaiah Cole with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Medical Board for investigation of Dr. Alan Mercer's treatment practices and testimony. The courtroom exploded again. Mercer's face flushed red, then pale. He looked at Evelyn, who was already gathering her things, her expression murderous. As officers moved to restore order, Richard remained in the witness stand, not moving, just sitting with his admission hanging in the air. Mr. Halvorson, Judge Morrison said more gently, do you require medical attention? No, Your Honor. I require honesty, and maybe some courage. He looked at Isaiah again. If you'll still help me, I'll pay what I promised. Not to make this right. Nothing can do that, but because you earned it. Isaiah stood slowly, every eye in the courtroom fixed on him. For a moment, he was that kid at the charity dinner again, barefoot and invisible. Then he spoke, and his voice was clear. I don't want your money. I never did. He looked at Mara, at the reporters still scrambling to document everything. But I want you to do something. Start a foundation. In my father's name. For people like him who know things the system won't recognize. Fund them. Protect them. Make sure what happened to him, and to me, doesn't happen to the next person. Richard nodded slowly. Marcus Cole Foundation. I'll do it. And one more thing. Anything. Tell Coach Brooks. He's dying thinking this all failed. He needs to know it didn't. The medical board moved quickly. Within a week, Dr. Alan Mercer was suspended pending investigation. Within a month, his license was revoked. The evidence Mara had uncovered suppressed patient improvements, falsified progress reports, a systematic pattern of maintaining dependency to justify ongoing treatment, was damning. Other doctors came forward. Nurses, physical therapists, people who'd watched him bury hope for years and finally felt safe enough to speak. The investigation expanded to other practitioners he'd helped discredit, including 3 whose stories paralleled Marcus Cole's almost exactly. Evelyn Halvorson filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She moved to Connecticut and never spoke publicly about Isaiah again. Richard resigned from his real estate company, citing health reasons. That part was true. He was finally working on actually getting better instead of pretending to try. 4 months after the hearing, Isaiah stood in Coach Leonard Brooks' hospital room. Brooks was out of critical condition, though his breathing still required assistance. His eyes were clear, though, and when he saw Isaiah, he smiled. "Heard you won," Brooks said, his voice raspy. "We won. You, me, my father. All of us. Your father would have been proud. He would have been scared, but he would have done it anyway." Isaiah sat in the chair beside the bed. "Just like you taught him." Brooks reached out, and Isaiah took his hand. They sat in silence for a while, 2 people who'd survived something that should have destroyed them. "The foundation is launching next month," Isaiah said eventually. "Richard donated $5 million to start. They're calling it the Marcus Cole Institute for Traditional Physical Medicine. They want me on the advisory board." "You're 13. I know. That's why they want me. To remind people that knowledge doesn't require permission." Isaiah paused. "They're also funding a scholarship. For kids like me. Kids who know things but can't prove it with the right pieces of paper." Brooks squeezed his hand. "Your father's name will mean something good now. That matters." "I know. What about you? What do you want?" Isaiah thought about it. "I want to help people, but I want to do it right. Learn the formal medicine too, not just what my grandmother taught me. Combine them. Show that both kinds of knowledge matter. That's a long road. I've got time." 6 months later, Isaiah stood on a small stage in a community center, watching Richard Halvorson walk to the microphone. No wheelchair, no cane, just careful, deliberate steps that held 3 years of work and honesty. "I'm here to announce the first 5 recipients of the Marcus Cole Scholarship," Richard said. His voice was stronger now, matched to his improving body. "These are young people who possess knowledge the system doesn't recognize yet, who've learned from family, from necessity, from traditions we've dismissed as primitive or unscientific. We're wrong. They're not." He read 5 names. Isaiah's was first. The scholarship covered living expenses, tutoring to catch up on formal education, and eventually college. But more than that, it was recognition. Acknowledgement that what Isaiah knew mattered, that his father's legacy had value, that generations of dismissed knowledge deserved preservation. Isaiah accepted his certificate and looked out at the small crowd. Mara was there, still writing articles about medical gatekeeping and systemic racism in healthcare. Detective Winters attended too, smiling from the back row. Coach Brooks sat in a wheelchair of his own now. His recovery was slower, but he was fighting. And scattered throughout the audience were others. People who'd reached out after Mara's articles. Families with traditional healing knowledge. Practitioners who'd been dismissed or destroyed. People who'd been invisible until someone finally pointed a light their way. "My father died thinking he failed," Isaiah said into the microphone. His voice was steadier now, matured by months of testimony and interviews and learning to speak truth in rooms that didn't want to hear it. "He died believing that the world was better off if people like us stayed quiet. That our knowledge was worth less than credentials. That survival meant silence." He looked at Richard, who met his gaze with something like respect. He was wrong. Not about the danger. That was real. Not about the cost. That was real too. But about the silence. Because silence doesn't protect us. It just makes it easier for them to pretend we don't exist. Isaiah held up the certificate. "This scholarship has my father's name on it. That name used to mean shame. Now it means possibility. That's not redemption. You can't redeem the dead. But it's memory. And memory is its own kind of justice." The applause was genuine, warm. Isaiah stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by the other scholarship recipients. A girl from Oklahoma who'd learned herbalism from her Chickasaw grandmother. A boy from New Orleans who understood body mechanics from generations of dancers. Others with knowledge the world needed but didn't know how to value. They talked, shared stories, made plans. For the first time in his life, Isaiah wasn't alone with what he knew. That evening, Isaiah visited his grandmother's grave for the first time since the hearing. He'd avoided it before, unable to face her memory while everything was falling apart. Now he knelt in the grass, the scholarship certificate in his hand. "I didn't stay quiet," he told the headstone. "I know that was the rule. Protect yourself, stay invisible, survive. But I couldn't do it. Dad couldn't do it either. Maybe that's what you really taught us. Not just the healing, but the belief that healing matters enough to risk everything." The city spread out below the cemetery, lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Richard Halvorson was practicing the exercises Isaiah had taught him. Somewhere, the Marcus Cole Institute was processing applications from people the medical system had dismissed. Somewhere, Coach Brooks was telling stories about a man who could heal with his hands and a boy who'd inherited the gift. Isaiah stood, touching the headstone once more. "I'm going to learn the formal medicine too. Get the credentials. Not because what you taught me wasn't enough, but because the world needs both. Someone has to show them they're not opposites. That knowledge from university and knowledge from family are both real, both valuable, both necessary." He walked back down the hill as darkness settled over the city. Tomorrow he'd start his tutoring sessions, begin catching up on years of missed education. Next month, the Marcus Cole Institute would open its doors. Next year, maybe he'd start high school. The road was long, but Isaiah had learned something his father never got the chance to understand. You didn't have to choose between truth and survival anymore. Not if you refused to fight alone. Not if you built something bigger than yourself. Not if you remembered that the miracle wasn't in the healing. It was in finally being heard. If you had knowledge that could help people, but the world refused to believe you because of who you are, would you stay silent to survive? Or speak up and risk everything? Hit like if this story moved you, and subscribe for more stories about truth, courage, and the battles we fight just to be heard.